All right, so I have 10 o'clock. Let's get started. Welcome our speaker this morning, Adam. Adam Berkowitz is a web developer for the University of Connecticut's Office of University Communications. In his position there, Adam has taken an active role in the area of web accessibility. So thank you very much, Adam.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and being here today. Before we get started, I just want to say one small thing for the people who are sitting kind of far back. Hi, good morning. You may wish to follow the slides through that link there. Some of the code examples, I didn't realize the font size is a little bit small from sitting way back there. So there you go. So this project, everything that sort of leads up to this presentation got started because last year, the World Usability Day conference was held at the University of Connecticut. And basically, almost all the people who are involved in the web in some way at the university ended up at the conference. People from the IT department, people from university communications where I work. And after the conference, it became rather apparent that we needed to do some, we needed to help build up our accessibility for our websites. And one of the things that came out of that was that essentially none of the navigation menus on the main navigation menus, like for desktop, on any of our websites were really accessible. They were basically not accessible by keyboard. And if JavaScript was turned off, they became unusable. So I started thinking, like, how can we solve this problem? How are we going to go about fixing this? And I'm not really a web accessibility expert, but I just sort of decided to go in and start seeing what I could do to fix the issue. One or two small little things. When I give examples up here, like basically this is modeled after the kinds of things we use at the University of Connecticut, like in terms of our navigation structure. But hopefully some of the ideas you'll be able to take away with you and apply them elsewhere. Also, I'm most familiar with the Mac OS screen reader. So when I start talking about screen readers, that's what I'm thinking of in my mind. I know there are other screen readers available, but there you go. So with that, I'm going to give you a little quiz. So take a moment and take a look at this code if you're familiar with this sort of thing. And think about these three questions. What's the effect of the code in general? What's the effect for people using a keyboard as their navigation input? And what's the effect for people using a screen reader, like the Mac OS screen reader? Anybody got, yeah?
There's not a lot of information that's going to sort of be tucked in there that can kind of rise up to help them using your keyboard or anything, because you're missing certain attributes like in your anchor.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could tuck away a lot more information in there.
Okay, great.
Looks like it would be hidden from a screen reader to read it out to you because its display default is none.
Yep.
And you only have a hover to
yep.
display it. You don't have it on focus.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody else?
It's on navigation. It's just a list of links based on structure. We impart that idea that it's a navigation. It's really just full of this as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, that's also true. Good. Anybody else? So this thing here is gets kind of important. What you all said is right on, right? This is just a list. We have to do some styling to get this to really do anything. But when the submenu is hidden like this initially, and there's only a hover state there, right? So even if you add a focus state to it, you're never going to be able to get to that here. Wait, there's a little, oops, go back. How do I do this? Good, here. You're never going to be able to get to this link right here. by the keyboard. The keyboard, if you're tabbing through, as it is right now, like Malik said, it will actually never arrive at that link. I had no idea that was the case. The reason that's the case is because the keyboard is tabbing to the href value of the link. It's not actually tabbing to the tag, which I had no idea that was what it was supposed to do. It's tabbing to the href value of the tag. So if you're tabbing through with a screen reader, if you go to this bad menu thing I made, you'll tab right through that menu without ever hitting any of the sub items. As far as the screen reader goes, right? The screen reader, the macOS screen reader, will tell you that there's a list of items here, but it won't tell you what any of them are, and it won't announce the name of what's inside this link because it doesn't know to do that. So basically, you've created a navigation structure, even if it is just a bulleted list. You've created a list of things here that unless you can use a mouse and unless you can see, you can't use. It is an unusable thing. So really, people need to be able to use websites. And I think in this room, that's and on the live cast, that's pretty uncontroversial. But unless you're building a single page website where everything is on one thing and you don't have any navigation, people are going to need to have a way of getting around. And if you're doing that, then I don't know why you're using WordPress. You should just build a one page, a single page of HTML or something. You don't need WordPress to manage that. If you're going to put something interactive like a menu on your site, or anything that's interactive on your site, then you should expect that people are going to use it. And that means that people may not use it in the manner in which you expect them to use the elements. So, like, I'm a web developer, and one of the things that we do as web developers is we say, okay, well, don't trust any input that the user gives you in a form, right? So I don't remember who it was yesterday who had the issue where like a blank password would just like log you in. But yeah, don't trust any input that the user gives you, either on the client side or on the server side. You can't necessarily trust that everybody in this room is going to want to use your interactive element, your navigation menu in the same way. And this really applies to all users, all people. Because you may say to me, well, Adam, I don't really have that many disabled people coming onto my site. Like, that's not such a big deal for me. Well, okay, that's fine. That's okay. Like, okay, if that's what you want to tell me, like, fine. But there are plenty of times when a perfectly able-bodied person is still not going to be able to use your website in the way you think they should. Sometimes people have to use websites in non-ideal circumstances. Like, have you ever tried to use your laptop on an airplane connected to Wi-Fi and the mouse is jiggling around because there's turbulence? Or have you ever held a baby while trying to use a website? I tried to hold my son while trying to use a major banking website one time, and it was like a total disaster. I was trying to like use my nose to navigate through it. Okay, I have a friend at work who's a web designer, and she's amazing. And one of the things that she told me is that she always prefers to use her pen. She hardly ever likes to touch her mouse. So she prefers to use pen and keyboard, right? You don't necessarily know. You can't predict as the developer of the site how people are going to interact with it. So how can we make sure that we get out of this state that's stuck, right? We need something that's poor. And I did not come up with this acronym, and maybe a lot of you know it already, but poor. So we're going to go through what this means in a moment and what this means in the context of a navigation menu. The first thing is perceivable. Oops, I did that to myself. There we go. I've got two computers working here, so like I'm a little off. Perceivable. So if the user can physically see that there is a menu there, it must be visible. It must be a thing that like they recognize as being a menu. I once, a couple weeks ago, went to a site where they had a menu, and the menu was just like a thin bar at the top with no indication that it was a menu whatsoever. I had to guess for about 10 minutes to find the nav structure. If the user can't physically see the menu, then a screen reader should be able to detect and announce all the items in that menu. Operable. So users should be able to interact with all those items via a mouse, a keyboard, whatever their means of communicating with the website. And for the mouse, these submenu items, because a lot of us use submenus in our navigation structures for higher education, those need to be fairly resilient. So they can't disappear immediately once the mouse leaves, or they shouldn't maybe disappear immediately once the mouse leaves. Everything should be understandable. The menu should behave predictably. It should be, should have some visual and auditory consistency. Like you should know when you get to a thing without thinking about it, what it should be doing. And it should be robust. So the menu needs to work whether or not JavaScript is enabled. So the question that as WordPress developers and designers, we need to ask ourselves is, what tools does WordPress give us in order to make this happen? See, that's where I get stuck doing. Oh no, what happened to my, oh, there we go. All right, so for me, this comes down to first understanding the HTML. So WordPress comes with some really fantastic tools for creating and modifying the HTML that's needed to build websites. And when we want to build a theme, or when we want to write a custom plugin for that theme, the WP Nav menu is an excellent place to start. So the WP Nav menu, according to the WordPress documentation, displays a navigation menu. That's what it does. It is a function that displays a navigation menu. It's easy to implement, and it's easy to understand. Now, as some of you in the room may be developers, and you'll know that this function will take a series of arguments that can slightly modify the output of that navigation menu. And it can be used alongside with registering a menu in order to create an interface on the administrative side of the website. So now the challenge with this is, what does this thing do? What arguments can you give it? And the most important thing is, what is the default output of this? So this is why I wanted you to follow along. So I'm sorry about this. I didn't anticipate the distance. This thing here is the default output of the WP navigation, WP Nav menu. That's the default output of the function. And it takes into consideration the three cases that at University of Connecticut we needed to deal with. Links on their own, things that are a link with a submenu under the link, and then a non-linked element with a submenu underneath it. And right here, this is where we get into trouble, because this is the same output as that first slide, as that quiz. Here is the default output of WP Nav menu. And it's got no href value, because WordPress is going to be non-opinionated about what should go there. It's not going to say, oh, there should be an href with a hashtag thing there. No. WordPress is just going to say, well, you didn't give me a link, so I'm not going to give you an href. Done. So for the most part, you know, this is like, okay, if you don't have, you know, a non-linked thing, then, you know, it's okay. But so what do we want, and how are we going to get it? Well, we want some markup that's going to facilitate this poor idea. And we want to be able to tell the difference. We want to be able to tell WordPress the difference between these three kinds of choices. right? A link by itself, a link with a submenu underneath, and then a non-link with a submenu underneath. We need a way of discriminating between and among these choices. So one thing we can do is we can add some links and buttons. So links are going to take our visitors off to a different thing, whether that's on the same page or a different page, whatever. Right? We want to be able to do that. But a button is a nice HTML-ready element that's going to just toggle some kind of action. It's ready to go. We want some icons to indicate the state of our menu visually. That would be nice. We want to give people an idea of whether the menu is open or closed. Inside the markup, we might want some ARIA attributes. And these are part of the HTML spec, basically, and they can help with screen readers, people who are interacting with the menu in that way. We might want some data attributes. Data attributes can contain all kinds of stuff, but they're also part of the HTML that we can add. And we'd like to be able to support for people who are not using JavaScript for whatever reason. Maybe the JavaScript file just didn't load. Maybe it's cached bad, like maybe it's just broken. You don't know. Maybe they turned it off in their browser, I don't know. So this is the basic markup that I came up with for what I wanted to see internally. We've got some WordPress stuff going on up here, but I added a Node.js class. We've got a counter, some data attribute. This ARIA label, the ARIA label is for screen readers. If you're not aware of this already, that's okay. It's going to replace this text that's inside the tag with whatever is contained within the ARIA label. And it will give us a way to tell people who can't see that there is a button coming up. So this is a link with a submenu underneath it, and there's a button element to control the submenu now instead of just all being controlled by the link. So the reason for that is if you're tabbing through, that way you can still open and navigate down through the submenu instead of like clicking off to the link by accident. We've got some ARIA attributes here. The ARIA has pop-up, announces that there's a pop-up element for the screen reader. And the ARIA expanded helps indicate if there is an expandable thing there, like an accordion or this navigation menu or what have you. So the data attributes, I'm sorry. Also, ARIA owns is kind of interesting. This makes like a relationship between this element and this element. It makes like a parent-child relationship. So this one's saying, okay, you're in charge of this thing down here. And that one's kind of, I wasn't really aware of that until I started investigating this, but there it is. Now the data attributes aren't too important except for this one, the data before. That one is going to actually provide the visual icon for our menu. I'll get to that in a moment. Here is a similar thing. This is our case for a non-linked item with a submenu. And in this case, we've now replaced the entire navigation thing with a button. And so now we've got a tabbable, interactable element that's part of HTML that we can use. Same basic idea. Oh, I forgot to mention ARIA hidden. That's going to hide from the screen reader this span tag, so it just like pretends it's not there. So the way we're going to get there is with the Walker Nav Menu. And this is the core class used to implement an HTML list of Nav Menu items. So what initially confused me and what I had to really come to understand was WP Nav Menu displays a navigation menu. It does not create a navigation menu. That's the thing that creates the navigation menu. That's the thing that creates the HTML output. It doesn't give us any CSS or JavaScript, but that's okay. We don't want it to for right now. We can add that on later, but it does expose 4 functions for us. It gives us a start level function, end level function, which can contain our submenus, start element, and an end element function, which will handle the list items. Now, because I was super confused by this, I wanted to see what this thing actually does. So I dumped out the output of a Walker as it traverses a menu structure. And this is what it does. It creates each element one at a time, bringing them all together. And you see there where it says string and it's like 137 or whatever. Obviously, that's not these 4 letters. It's containing all of the HTML up to that point. So it's going in sequence, and that's what it's doing. It's like building through. It's containing all of the HTML, not just like the 4 letters of the word. So let's take a look at how to do that. Basically, this is the flow through the Walker menu. The first thing it does is it tries to open a list element tag. You can then put it then puts in whatever is necessary for that tag, and then it ends the element. It closes that tag. So there's our start L function and our end L function. Those are 2 of the core functions. Anything else needs to go inside one of those functions, like any extra stuff we want to have happen. Here, this is what happens if you start creating a submenu. So we open the list element tag with start L. We put in all the stuff we want to put in. Then we use the start level function, or really the Walker does. We use it does the start level function, builds in whatever it needs to build in for that next submenu UL tag, goes through the same process to encompass all the child items of the menu element, closes that UL tag, and then closes the LI tag. So once we understand this process, then it's not terrible to start figuring out how to get the HTML structures that I showed you before. So here's a little pseudocode that demonstrates this. So I try not to like read things off, but you know, it's sort of worth reading off. So we start with a counter because it's nice to have a counter for things sometimes, especially like this, where we're going through iteratively. But then we need to decide if there's like a top level page, and we need to know, like, is it just going to be a link? Is it going to be a link with a button? Like, what is the organization of this thing? And then at the end of that process, we can add one to the counter to do some other stuff. Here's what this looks like inside the function I wrote, and that's how it goes through. You'll see that there's some stuff for adding classes here, right there. I actually did some other things after this was written, but okay. But down here is where it's making those sort of choices about what's going on. And here we can see the start level function. And these are the only 2 that are in this custom Walker that I was writing. So how are we going to support this with CSS and JavaScript? Because right now we've just got, you know, as you mentioned before, like a bulleted list of things, right? We don't, you know, it's sort of not anything at this point. But the good news is that now all the elements are going to be findable by a keyboard, and all the elements are going to be findable by a screen reader. So we've accomplished like at least a little bit of our goal. So I'm not going to go over everything, but just some of the important bits. The CSS should be like scoped somehow to this menu. We want to use as few styles as possible to get this thing working the way we want. So as WordPress developers, like my goal was to make it so that the theme would actually provide like all the padding and margin and all that kind of stuff. But I just wanted to make something functionally styled. And I want to avoid display none and display block in this thing. So when we talk about sort of non-ideal circumstances, display none and display block are kind of not what we want, because as soon as you leave the area of the display block, the element disappears immediately, like that. It's gone. So if your mouse is unsteady for any reason and you're trying to navigate through a submenu, you'll never be able to get on one of those links because the mouse won't be stable enough, whether you're on a plane or you've got a loss of motor control or whatever it is. You're holding a baby. So in this case, we can use these other things. We can use transitions. We can use opacity, visibility. We can use height and positioning, delays. All these kind of things will help give us a little bit more refined sense of how to keep just even the mouse submenu open. Oh, and you can go to these little links here. I made little code pens to help. Here you can see what that looks like in practice. So you see the mouse, it goes, it comes, it goes, it comes. And then this one sort of fades in and out a little bit. So remember when I said the data before thing was kind of important? So right here, we've got this content before, and then we can actually pick up the data attribute from the HTML and use it in our CSS. So why would you do that? Well, CSS doesn't really do a good job at containing the, at like getting to the things that are between the tags. Like you can style, of course you can style things that are like in the CSS, but you can't really style that thing to like switch back and forth when you hover or when you focus. That's really hard for CSS to do. On the other hand, JavaScript can't target pseudo elements like before. Can't do it because they're not part of the DOM. So now we're in a situation where we've got, like, on the one hand, CSS can't do one thing that you want, and JavaScript can't do the other thing that you want. So what do? You use something that is part of the HTML spec that both can handle. Notice also that these are all like just little text elements. That's, you know, in case JavaScript breaks and your fancy icons go away or something, you still have something here. We also want to give people the ability to still use the navigation menu if JavaScript is unavailable for some reason. So this is where the Node.js class comes in. If we're going to hide a menu, then we should let people see it. So the focus within class is super interesting. It's a CSS pseudo class, and I'm going to read from the MDN documentation. That's the Mozilla Developer Network, I think it is, where they say that this thing represents an element that has received focus or contains an element that has received focus. In other words, it represents an element that is itself matched by the focus pseudoclass or has a descendant that is matched by focus. What? So these are the same two menus. One has no focus within and one does have focus within. Watch what happens. This one, it skips right over the submenu. This one, it goes through the submenu. Okay? Now you might say to me, Adam, that's amazing. Why wouldn't we just use this? We could be done. CSS only, no JavaScript. Well, there's an issue with that. You will maybe not be surprised to know that Microsoft browsers don't support this. So it is not supported at all in Internet Explorer, and it likely never will be given their cycle. In Edge, there's a request for this to be implemented, but that's a couple years old, and who knows if it's going to be implemented or not. But you might say, Adam, but wait, you could use a polyfill. And then I'll say, yeah, but you're still stuck in JavaScript land then if you've got a polyfill and like something happens to the JavaScript. So here's like a little example of a child theme where I built sort of combining my menu idea CSS thing with like the 2017 theme. Same basic idea. So how can we now implement some JavaScript that is still fairly accessible? Like once we've gotten to this point, like what are we going to do? So we want something that's still inclusive and accessible. Well, one thing we can do is we can keep the API for the JavaScript fairly small. So I wrote a navigation class that helps sort of like deal with all this. And it has exactly one method. And that one method can receive exactly one configuration object. So why would I do this? Well, because, you know, I didn't start out like as a software engineer or something. Like my background is in music and education. So I've been sort of learning as fast as I can for a while now. But having one method lets a range of developers use this instead of having like 5 or 6 different methods, and maybe they get confused. And the same goes for having the default configuration for this class. It also helped me figure out and focus on functions within the class rather than a bunch of options. Now, the disadvantages to doing this way are that this is not as flexible as having a bunch of choices and a bunch of methods that you might want to use. And more stuff has to be contained within the class. But okay, let's say we're going to do this anyway. So how are we going to do it? This is the constructor function for the navigation class that I wrote. And here you can see where the constructor takes a default object. Now, each one of these things can be overridden individually. So in this case, if the JavaScript is working, this is going to display some nice font awesome icons if they're available, if font awesome is loaded on your site. And then it has some other things that set some defaults outside of this configuration object. That init method runs through a couple functions that are contained within it. It's going to attach and set some event listeners so that the navigation menu knows whether or not there's a mouse hovering over it, knows whether or not there's a, somebody is tabbing through, knows whether or not, some other things. It'll inline a little bit of CSS for us also. Then it dispatches events as they come in. And it'll determine that using a switch statement, and then it handles the events after dispatching them. Again, all this inside here, just with the idea of keeping the external API fairly small for people. So let's just look at one of those event handlers. This handles focus in. So the focus in event is kind of interesting. It's a little bit different from focus, the focus event. It's fired when the element is about to receive focus. So the target here is the element that's about to receive the focus, and the related target here is the thing that it just left. Now, why is that useful? Because let's say you've got 5 navigation items and they all have submenu, and you've all gone through and you've implemented the focus within CSS class. Well, if somebody wants to tab through all those, they now have to tab through every single option to get to the last top level navigation item. But what we want is, we want that ability, but we want to give users the choice. We want to give people the choice of being able to either descend through the items or just go straight across the menu to the last one if they're using a keyboard, right? We don't want to predict necessarily. So focus in helps with that, because we can now say, oh, you've like left an element, and I know what that element was because I attached a data object to it, or I attached a class name or an ID to it. I know what that is, JavaScript says, and I can like close that submenu automatically. Or I can just skip it altogether. Or I can change the state of aria expanded, like this here. Or I can change the icon state. Here's a little example of sorry, it goes really fast. I don't know how to make GIFs. I'm sorry about that. But this is sort of what it's doing, and you can see that like it's closing the items like on their own, you know, going through and doing like that kind of thing. So what do we do? Like, what do I do moving ahead? Well, one thing is just to learn more about inclusive and accessible design and development. I want to come and I want to talk to all of you about this because I'm just curious about it in general. I also want to make this project open source so that you can all hopefully work together with me on it, because I don't want it to just be my thing. I want like people to, you know, be able to collaborate a little bit. I would ideally like this to go out to the entire University of Connecticut community, either through the websites that my office manages or you know, working with our IT department to integrate it into their things. And also being able to package it up as a composer package, NPM package, WordPress plug. I want people to be able to use this in whichever way is most comfortable for them to use it. And that's basically where I am with this project. It's not quite in production yet, but I hope we're getting very close. And there you go. So before I finish, I'd just like to thank all of you for coming and all the people on the live stream, and the organizers of WPCampus, and all my colleagues at the University of Connecticut. So thanks. We've got about 10 minutes left. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
I understand the purpose of what you just mentioned about what it just had focus or what's about to have focus. But
Yes.
I was just kind of wondering how that works. You know, how you write that, what you know, just kind of how that all.
So the focus in
Adam,
yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question is, how do I write the focus in handler? So the focus. So you know about the focus.
And yeah, what other code ought to be around it, like
Okay.
non-technical.
Okay. So basically, there are three. I think three. Might be more. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. There are three focus events. There's focus in, and focus out. Focus is sort of a general purpose thing, and it's what we usually use when we write CSS. The focus in is already built into the HTML spec, right? So I didn't write focus in. That's a handler that's already there. So then what I do is when I detect, the handler just detects where I am in the menu. Whether or not there's, let's see, I have to look now. So I gotta look. I gotta go back. How do I go back with this? Okay, so it's going to detect what the target is. It's going to detect whether or not I'm still within the context of the menu, right? I don't want this thing firing if I'm not inside the menu. So if it's not inside the menu, if like the parent UL isn't inside the menu and the parent UL doesn't, like the target's not there, then just exit the function, right? So otherwise, then we continue with the function, and the expanded element is we're going to get within the parent UL, we're going to find all the things that are already expanded true. I think that's what I'm doing. It's been a little while since I wrote this. Then we're going to look for the open element collection. So we're going to get this class name here. There's some other code that goes, if you want, I'm happy to show it to you.
I was just wondering about this scenario. It's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's, you know, okay. And any other questions? Yes?
I'm wondering, have you thought about using arrow keys for navigation?
You know, honestly, I haven't, but I probably should. You know, I was mostly focused on tabbing because, you know, I don't know why. It just seemed to be the thing that I was focused on. Probably I should implement some other event listeners for that. It wouldn't be so hard necessarily because I'm already attaching event listeners, so it'd probably be pretty easy to key up, key down, whatever. Yeah, but that's why this is still not quite production yet. Anybody else? Yes.
Have you considered porting some of these modifications in the core so that they're available for general WordPress users as well?
In all honesty, no. I had not, but I may do that now. I have no idea how I would go about doing that, but I mean, it seemed to me that I was looking, as I was looking at the code, that they were trying to be fairly unopinionated with what they gave developers to begin with. So, like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? But it doesn't hurt to ask. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Are there any other types of groups trying to do things similar, like building similar type stuff like this that you know of, or?
Yeah. So, you know, I got some inspiration from like Hayden Pickering, who wrote the book. I'm going to botch the name right now. Inclusive Design. Does anybody know this right now? Like Inclusive Design, something. Yeah, Inclusive Component. He's got like a really nice website. If you want, come talk to me later and I'll show you. You can find the book through Smashing Magazine. It's fantastic. There's also the Y Aria group and WCAG and all those kind of people. And I follow like there's a mailing list that I can't remember the name of right now, where I get some accessibility news coming in. Yeah, but if you want to come find me, and we can figure it out. Anybody else? Got, like,
Inclusive design patterns is like,
that's it. Thank you. I knew I was going to screw it up. Yes.
Have you done any usability testing, or are you not at that point yet? I'm curious as to, like, are you just doing it yourself? Or are you getting somebody who's really adept with a screen reader, or solely uses keyboard navigation?
Right. So no, I have not. Not because I don't want to necessarily. I have been testing this with a screen reader, the Mac OS screen reader, and that's been very informative. I actually went to the Office of Disability something. It's our office for helping students with disabilities, and I talked with somebody there about you know, whether or not they do user testing, and they have put out calls for that kind of thing and tried to do surveys in the past and said that nobody ever responds. None of the students ever respond. And I don't think that we quite have the budget necessarily to hire, you know, like a group to come in and do this. So I'm kind of winging it and hoping for the best, which I know is not ideal, but yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks very much, and I hope you have a good rest of the day and a good conference.